The tragedy of the Chernobyl power plant near Pripyat, Ukraine, is a world-renowned nuclear disaster. The accidental core explosion in one of the reactors caused a mass evacuation of the city, leaving behind the infamous ghost town that is still present to this day. I first learned about Chernobyl several times while growing up, never from school, but rather through popular forms of media such as video games or movies. My first encounter was when I was 10 through the popular video game Call of Duty Modern Warfare, released in 2007. This game features several missions taking place in Pripyat, where I quickly learned about the deadliness of radiation. A few years later, in 2012, a few of my friends and I watched a horror movie called The Chernobyl Diaries. Chernobyl Diaries is an over-the-top fictional story about a group of young Americans who go into the deserted city for a tour, subsequently getting hunted down and murdered by a horde of nuclear radiation-induced zombie people, or by the Ukrainian military, who were in on the zombies and didn't want the news to be leaked. From these two examples, we can conclude that Hollywood has constructed America's views of Pripyat, Ukraine, as being a deserted, creepy ghost town where a whole bunch of crazy stuff goes down. As Americans, we totally overlook the historical event itself and its effects regarding the Soviet Union, particularly the thousands of residents of Pripyat that are forced to abandon their city and whose lives are forever changed because of the catastrophe. Founded in 1970, Pripyat was one of many atomic towns built by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. These atomic towns were built to house families of nuclear power plant workers. Pripyat was a modern, vibrant city, attracting many young people due to the abundance of jobs and opportunity. At one point, there were 5 schools splitting 5,000 students, children of the many young couples who migrated to the up-and-coming city. Pripyat's growth and prosperity came to a halt in 1986 when disaster struck, just 16 years after being founded. One of the reactors exploded during a safety test, killing 2 workers on the spot, 30 workers shortly after due to the radiation. There are estimates of anywhere from 9,000 and 93,000 people who could have died from radiation-induced cancer directly from the event or from living near the contaminated area. Pripyat was 2 miles away from the reactor, so the whole city had to be evacuated within 2 days. Tests quickly discovered Pripyat was uninhabitable, so the previous 49,000 residents could not return to their homes. Nearly 6 months later, the Soviet Union built a replacement city called Slavutich, just 30 miles away. At first, hopes were high when the migrants changed cities, the first mayor saying, "If Pripyat represents destruction, defeat, a lost city, a dead city, then Slavutich is a resurrection." Slavutich was quite the thing of beauty. Workers from 8 different Soviet republics were called in to rapidly build the replacement city, modeling all 8 of the districts off of the 8 different republics represented by the workers. Despite its creation out of the ashes of Chernobyl, Slavutich and its residents ironically needed the old power plant to survive. A railway was built to link the defunct plant to the new city. Initially, many people worked, helping with the cleanup efforts. Several other reactors were still in use, employing the majority of Slavutich's citizens. The former residents of Pripyat simply moved cities and continued working similar jobs. In fact, in the 90s, Slavutich was the richest city in Ukraine due to the abundance of nuclear energy jobs. Life was good in Slavutich. The Phoenix city could boast about a great economy, having the youngest average age in the country, and world-class musicians from all over the world coming to perform. In the year 2000, after several more risky complications with the other Chernobyl reactors, Ukraine came under international pressure and finally had to stop the production of nuclear energy. The halt in energy production was a severe blow to the prosperity of Slavutich's residents. More than half of the population lost their jobs, marking an end to a controversial yet prosperous era. In 2010, there was a brief resurgence in economic activity. The giant hangar was built to enclose the exploded power plant. The hangar is called the New Safe Confinement. It is meant to confine the radiation, allow people to work on cleanup remotely and as safely as possible. During the construction period, Slavutich became a hub of international activity, housing workers from over 20 countries. In 2016, the New Safe Confinement was put into place. Now Slavutich is in another recession, as the many workers who migrated to help with the construction have started to leave. More than 30 years later, the mood of Slavutich is no longer as cheery, as the effects of nuclear radiation slowly but persistently take a toll. The poor residents of Slavutich are even more down on their luck now than that their jobs have disappeared. Nowadays, only 3,000 workers hop aboard the train directed to Chernobyl, compared to the 9,000 workers 2 decades ago. Many of the old reactor workers are now having to get retrained to work jobs in different fields, or also have to relocate once again. Slavutich's growth rate has started slowing down. Many people are beginning to leave to the military. Only a third of the old Pripyat residents currently live in. Those that stay are quickly finding themselves the victims of drug abuse, alcoholism, and boredom. The most obvious and horrible part of the Chernobyl disaster is the health effects on the people nearby, both physically and mentally. Besides those who initially died from the blast, the Soviet Union sent 600,000 men and women called liquidators to clean up the radioactive mess. At first, remote-controlled bulldozers were sent in to clean up, but the radiation rendered them useless. The only alternative were human beings. People paid the price. Their bodies soaked in radiation as they cleared trees, closed down streets, and helped build a concrete sarcophagus to enclose the power plant. In the immediate years following the cleanup, 4,000 of the brave liquidators died. Another 70,000 became disabled due to the high levels of radiation. Families of these brave men and women have to live with the scars of the family members they lost. Every year, there are memorial ceremonies where families of the deceased gather and light candles to pay their respects to Slavojich. There's even an annual trip back to Pripyat every Easter. While the visit is brief, families get to return to the graveyards, now in the nuclear wasteland, pay respect to their ancestors that they now cannot freely visit. One 70-year-old man refuses to ever go back to his old home in Pripyat, lamenting how the cemetery was built with enough room for 50 years, but it's already full. When death and sickness doesn't stop with just those who sent in to clean up the radiation, there are many accounts of previously healthy children getting asthma and cancer-related ailments, sometimes leading to death after the meltdown in Chernobyl. The mushrooms and berries naturally grown around Slavojich are not safe despite being over 20 miles away from Chernobyl. Even today, young children are getting health issues such as enlarged thyroids. That causes are often unknown, but their parents often blame the radiation. An interesting phenomenon are a group of elderly ladies who refuse to move on from their homeland of Pripyat. Just months after the forced evacuation out of the radiation zone, 1,000 old ladies voluntarily moved back, refusing to be separated from their ancestral homelands. Known as the babushkas of Chernobyl, 100 of them still live within the radiation zone today. Many of these ladies survived World War II, Stalin, and countless other hardships, and refused to give up their land that meant so much to them and their families. These babushkas live lonely lives in isolation, surrounded by radiation, but they do not let the radiation win, dying happily in their homeland. Slavutich is now in a precarious condition, its future uncertain as its economy and life slowly seeps away. The current mayor, Yuri Fomichev, has hope. He envisions many outcomes for the city, such as becoming a tech hub, or a unique place to film movies, utilizing the various architecture of the different districts. But the one idea he thinks is most fruitful is sticking with being a nuclear city. The difference is this time, Fomichev hopes to focus on nuclear research rather than production. It's not a bad idea considering how one of the biggest nuclear waste dumps in the world is a mere 30-mile train ride away. Ultimately, Fomichev hopes to gain a university in Slavutich, along with a nuclear fission research reactor, to make use of their unique situation and keep their city alive and thriving. Those affected by the Chernobyl power plant are yet another group of people where nuclear development and the radiation that followed have impacted the culture of the community and the way the rest of the world views them. Like the people of the Marshall Islands who must deal with the aftermaths of nuclear testing, the Ukrainians who lived in Pripyat are also forever changed due to high levels of radiation. Families are emotionally damaged from the early losses of loved ones, not to mention their own physical distress from many ailments of their own caused by the radiation. The culture and way of life before the nuclear meltdown is only a pleasant memory, as the good times have gone, and economic downturn and sickness has engulfed the people of Slavutich. Sadly, popular culture views Chernobyl as a Soviet failure, the ghost city of Pripyat as a fascinating place to set movies or video games. No one thinks the disaster is a humanitarian issue, where thousands of people have borne the burden of nuclear radiation and continue to suffer to this very day. Currently, the residents of Slavutich face possibly the second biggest crisis in their short history. Economic ruin could fall upon the struggling city. Hopefully, resilience and the positive attitude of these strong people can be enough to ride out the last wave of bad luck into brighter and better times.